And I think we're getting ready for our keynote. Keynote's someone I've known for a while. I don't know, Dave. You probably don't remember this. Dave is back there, right? We can bring him on. Do we have to do a full introduction? We'll just bring him on and chat. Oh, there he is. I love it. So, how's it going, man?
Good.
That is hilarious.
You can't talk in that thing, so it's a pain.
I got the screenshot, so you're captured in memoriam.
That's awesome. Thanks for coming, Dave. I've earlier on, I remembered, I don't know how I remember this. You probably do not remember this, but when you started, do you recall when SET was like in beta? Like 12 years ago or something like that?
Long time ago, isn't it? You're getting old.
It was.
It was probably what, 2007 or 8 maybe?
I think, yeah, around that time. I was just getting into security. I was a system admin. I was looking at this stuff, getting into hacker spaces and ISSA and all that, and heard about you. And you're like, oh, I'm beta testing this. And I had no idea of anyone in the community. And I just emailed you. I'm like, hey, can I take a look at the beta? And you're like, yeah, man, here it is. Let me know if you find anything. I'm like, wow, that was cool. People here are nice.
Hey, it was such a cool time, right? Because you got to kind of figure things out and come up with new stuff. And I always love people testing, my stuff. I remember the first tool I ever wrote was a tool called Fast Track. And it was like, Mutz from Offensive Security was like, hey, you should figure out Python, because I knew C and C++ at the time. And I remember I had no idea what I was doing. And it was like 7,000 lines of try except blocks. I didn't know what functions were at the time. It was just this horrible piece of code. And hopefully no one can find the old Fast Track code. I tried to scrape it from the internet as much as possible. But, it's all about learning, right? You come into this industry, you figure things out, you learn from other people. And that's the most miraculous thing is how I think the community really shares their knowledge and tries to promote a much better place for the world, right? And so bringing new folks in, new people coming in, I'm glad to hear that story. That's really where we should be at, welcoming everybody in and teaching and trying things out. And for you, for reaching out for wanting to do that, that's awesome. That's awesome. I didn't remember that, so.
Yeah, no, and that's been a very common theme here. Bryson kicked it off, talking about community and working together, and I think that theme is kind of something what you're going to talk about here with us today in your keynote.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it. Let me share my screen. Bryson, do you have something you want to say too about the beard? And you had a beard update apparently.
Yeah, I do have an update. So. Ron and I have each already pledged $2,500 to the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu. Keenan Skelly over at Shifted has pledged $1,000. George surprised everybody live today by announcing that he's pledged $1,000. Because of that, Ann Johnson over at Microsoft has pledged $1,000 match. So up to $1,000 of individual donations, she'll match those for Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu with the Great Shave for Charity tomorrow.
It's awesome. Well, count me in for $1,000 donation as well. So I'll do that right after this.
That's awesome, Dave. And where would someone go to donate, Bryson?
So we'll post the link in the YouTube channel. We'll throw it up here, scrolling throughout the day for the Zoom registration. And then there's a link on that page that goes to the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu's donation page.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, I think it's Dave's turn to yeah, there you go. Look at that.
Wow. It's amazing. Technology worked instantaneously. Great. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming today to Unicon and to hear me. Special thanks to everybody that put this conference on. Obviously being remote and virtual is a whole different experience, and to pull something like this off and have such an amazing group of folks. Shout out to the Scythe folks and for everybody else that put this together. It's just absolutely incredible. So thank you all for having me for today in this keynote. This is a keynote. This is the first time I've ever given this presentation. Why is there's a little mouse thing there, and it's not mine. I don't know where that's at. Maybe that's somebody else. I have no idea. Anyways, there's going to be a mouse there apparently this entire time, a little mouse icon there. No idea. But anyways, to pull something like this off is incredible. This is one of my favorite ones. I've never given this presentation before, so this is brand new for Unicon, and it's really looking forward to looking at where we kind of came from in the security scene. I'm not going to give a history lesson. There's been plenty of presentations on that, but how do we look forward in what we see? We see capabilities of adversaries advancing. We see, research advancing in the security industry, and there's a lot of technology progression. I mean, just today, Elon Musk showed a video of his brain implant company actually, an actual monkey playing video games with his mind, right? Technology is progressing at such a rapid rate that it's very hard to get control of that in our spaces. And regardless if we're going to cloud, regardless if we're on premise or we're hybrid, whether we have work from home or our employees are on premise or a mixture of the above, all of these complexities are unique to our organizations. And every network, every infrastructure, every company is completely different than the other company itself, which means that the same model that you apply for one organization is going to vary very differently for another organization. It's very much like the human body. Why can't we, cure specific diseases? Well, every single human being is different. The way that we react to things, or DNA strands, everything is completely different. There's a lot of complexities that go into certain things that allow us to, make changes or to have medical advancements or breakthroughs. So all of these things together, make a lot of complexity in our industry. And our industry is very complex in nature because there's so much out there. I mean, you hear, every single year at a certain large conference, they come up with a brand new buzzword that's going to make the marketing go forward a couple of years more, whether that's, machine learning or artificial intelligence, or that's, all these crazy terms that continuously come out, DLP, which I still haven't seen successful in an organization before. All of these different terms that create additional complexities when really a lot of the things that we need to focus on are our basics. And I'll get into that. Planning for tomorrow, developing a forward view to security is what we're talking about today. But just really quick, my name is Dave Kennedy. I've been in the security industry for 20 years, which is insane. I never would have thought I would be this old, first of all. That's crazy how fast time flies. But I've done a lot of great stuff. I'm very fortunate to be in the security industry with all of these amazing folks in here, whether you're just starting today or you've been in the industry for a long time. There's so many incredible people coming into this industry. It's absolutely amazing to see all the folks kind of contributing and providing their own experiences and sharing their own experiences. I'm the author of a number of open source tools like Magic Unicorn. I'll be showing that today. I figured why not show Magic Unicorn in a unicorn version of a presentation for Unicon. And so I'll be demoing some of that. I'm the founder and CEO of TrustedSec and Binary Defense, two companies located in Cleveland, Ohio, although we have folks located all over the world. We just did a groundbreaking ceremony for our brand new state-of-the-art headquarters, which is going to be awesome. It has nap rooms, video game rooms, a whole bunch of other cool stuff too that we're putting into it. So have a fun time while we're there. Even though I think like 80% of our workforce is like in different locations, all the way from Norway to the UK, everywhere else. But we wanted a cool place to show our own. Co-author of the book Metasploit: The Penetration Tester's Guide. I've testified in front of Congress and other things. I'm on the news all the time. Some of my fun ones, testifying in front of Congress, I wouldn't consider a fun one. I'll never do that again. But I was on the Katie Couric show. That was a lot of fun. I got to hack somebody live in the audience. Shortly after Katie Couric got canceled, hopefully it wasn't anything that I did. But I also helped out the TV show Mr. Robot with Rami Malek and Christian Slater. And believe it or not, I was in a Chris Brown rap video. It's not safe for work, but called Post and Delete. So again, I wouldn't recommend watching it at work. Probably not safe there. But it was kind of cool because I got to do all the stunts and skits and the code and everything that was in the background. The whole premise was that Chris Brown and Zoe Dowders had a girlfriend that they broke up with, and they wanted to delete all the photos and stuff of them off of their phone. So they got me as a hacker to come in and it's called Post and Delete. I don't know. It was fun. I had a good time to actually go and shoot that, and never thought growing up as a computer nerd in high school that I would ever be in a rap video. So that was an awesome experience. Also, currently working on a DeLorean. So I bought a DeLorean about 8 months ago, and I'm currently converting it into the Back to the Future time machine. So I'm hopefully having that done around the June or July timeframe is what I'm shooting for. Still working on a lot of parts, getting in and kind of customizing it. But that's been always a fun thing on the side to go and do. But that's not why we're here today. We're here today to talk about looking forward and what do we have to look forward to. If you look at what's happening right now in the news, 2020 wasn't a great year for us in cybersecurity. Canalys did a survey of the different types of data breaches everything from records, average records lost, all the way to known data breaches. In 2020 was by far our largest year ever from a data breach perspective. And yet it's one of the most largest spends that we've ever had in the cybersecurity perspective. So why is that? Why are we seeing a huge uptick in breaches? And we've seen, crazy ones happen that we never saw before. Just a few weeks ago, Acer, for example, completely hit with ransomware and shut down their operations. $50 million demand for ransomware. We had Universal Health Systems, again, shut down all of their ER rooms and everything else to that effect with ransomware. We've had a Garmin shut down for a couple of days, ransomware. I think it was 10 million or 15 million for that one. So we see ransomware obviously being a big problem. But then we see these huge, massive ones, like we saw with SolarWinds, like we saw with Proxy Login and a lot of the other ones that are out there. These massive, massive, massive security issues that we're experiencing today that, were always prominent in our industry, dating back from when I first started 20 years ago, prior to that as well, all the way to today. And so what's really going on out there? And when you look at most organizations really struggle with security. I mean, it's a major problem for small to medium-sized businesses. It's a major problem for large organizations. It's a major problem for the medical industry, for manufacturing, for financial, for every organization is consistently fighting this exact same problem. And most organizations cannot understand complex techniques. And when I mean complex techniques, a great example we were talking about before, just with the Maze ransomware, I wouldn't even consider that complex techniques. Those are pretty average, known tactics, techniques, and procedures that you would see employed by ransomware. Everything from deleting volume shadow copies to run DLL for remote code execution, from importing a DLL into memory and using that for code execution at the system. Encryption, registry modification, scheduled tasks for persistence. All of those things are things that are literally 20-year-old type of techniques that we're still applying today that we still struggle with in our products. And so, that's not even complex. That's more in the script kiddie categorization I would consider of specific attack vectors. Look at what happened with NotPetya. NotPetya, Russian, malware attacking Ukrainian-based tax software, used run DLL32 to import pervc.dat, which then, caused automatic credential scraping, encryption, and then lateral movement, as kind of a one fail swoop and caused, what was $172 million worth of damage in FedEx. A number of other organizations were hit extremely quick. So all of these things, like, again, not highly sophisticated attacks. And then when we see something like Proxy Login, our minds are blown because there's 0 days out there, but yet 0 days have been around forever. It's just the market moved from open source and collaboration of 0 days to private industry market where they're selling or using it or somehow getting them. The Proxy Login one's very peculiar, where you have, a security researcher that sends a notification to Microsoft on the 3rd. And then by the 5th, we're seeing active exploitation from an adversary or nation state, most specifically China, using that same exact exploit that was gifted towards Microsoft. So where did that leak come from and how did that get there? That's an interesting case study. Hopefully we find more information on. But again, we have our minds blown by these sophisticated attacks when still the basic attacks are very difficult for us to go and do. And there's a reason why we're at where we're at today. I mean, we have products today that promise the world. They promise that, they have the latest and greatest in artificial intelligence and machine learning. They have, the most amount of dedication towards understanding attack vectors. But again, you look at the problem that we have is that every organization is unique and different. So you can't create a solution for one company that works across the board for every single organization out there. There are companies out there that use MSHTA within their organization. And that's Microsoft's main issue too, is Microsoft has the largest, fleet ever in our history of mankind, from a technological perspective of operating systems that they have to deal with, and legacy versus, all of these different configurations and modifications or custom things that have been bolted on. It's a difficult, complex issue. And so, what happens is that these organizations, hire a security person or have a security team, and they're trying to retroactively go and fix a lot of the legacy issues that you have, as well as try to support the business future state. On top of it, trying to build out, detections or ways of preventing attacks that are unique to their own organization. Or they just say, well, we have this specific piece of technology and it's going to do all that for us, which it never does. And so, we have a lot of different problems that, literally these tools that we buy today are signature-based detections of the 1990s. And we still have trouble, bolting them into our organization to understand how they can give us coverage and effectiveness around these specific types of attacks that we see out there. And so, the biggest thing on a lot of this is any type of attack customization is going to circumvent most of these types of technologies that most organizations have out there. if you modify Maze, for example, it gets modified, quite frequently. It changes variants and known types of attack paths on a regular basis. The first few days or the first few hours that Maze gets released, there's 0 detections out there for these organizations. And then, you have, a time period where signatures are updated or the organization releases new detections. And then from there, you're hoping you're not the person being hit in that line of fire. And I want to show you today, just some basics here. And this is an example of Windows Defender. And I'll explain kind of the different levels of I guess, protection, visibility, response, et cetera, here in a second. But if you look at today's preventative mechanisms or even detective mechanisms, prevention is by far the lowest bar of security that you have in an organization. It means it's a commodity threat that has been crowdsourced out, and it's been written to be very specific to a type of attack that they've seen in the wild. So this is a good example here. Windows Defender, instead of fixing Register 32 and removing the ability to download and execute files from a living off the land perspective, they wrote a signature for it within Windows Defender, which is, if you call Register 32, and if you Google Register 32 Lawbass project with Advar Moore and those folks, a lot of good stuff in there. But if you call Register 32 with the /s/n/u/i, you go out to a specific website, download a scriptlet object, and then call the scriptlet object DLL. What will happen is it'll download that file, execute it, and then give you code execution. This is commonly used by, ransomware, software. It's commonly used by adversaries and attackers. So, a signature is written through Windows Defender to stop this specific attack. So if you run this command line, from your Windows platform, it'll automatically block it. However, if we just modify this in just a small, tiny way, we're able to completely circumvent that commodity type detection. So if you look at this, we're calling bits admin to go and download a file instead. We can use a number of different tools. In fact, the latest versions of Windows 10 have wget, or is it curl, whatever. I think it's wget. You have Excel, which can download files. There's a number of different download components here that we can use to instead of remove the download functionality from Register 32 and allow the code execution functionality instead. So we compiled 2 different versions of this to allow it to go and execute. So we use bits admin to download, and then we call our specific test file. And then we call the scriptlet object DLL to go and execute. And this completely circumvents that detection and allows us to get code execution. Conversely, we can just copy. It's ridiculous. These signatures are again, lowest bar level possible. These detections, if you just take strobj.dll from the system32 directory and you copy it from the system32 directory to your own directory and rename it like test.dll or whatever you want to, you can still use this exact same command here. Register 32 /s/n/u/i, go out to a website and download it and call test.dll, and it'll still circumvent that detection criteria and allow you to gain the code execution onto the system, again, completely circumventing this specific piece. So, again, when you look at preventative tools such as endpoint protection products, intrusion prevention systems, and antivirus, they are literally the lowest bar of entry for attackers. It's what we would consider more of the script-kitted categorization for reducing attack surface. So, if you're leveraging these types of products for your security controls, your bar is set extremely low from a defensive perspective against these types of attacks, regardless of what the technology is. Intrusion prevention systems, endpoint protection products, antivirus products, they're all the lowest bar possible that is set because it has to be used across all of these different organizations. And to get around it is absolutely, completely trivial. And I'm going to show you another example of this here. I'm going to show Magic Unicorn here, and hopefully you can see my screen. Yep, looks like you can. And so I'm going to run Magic Unicorn. And if you're not familiar with Magic Unicorn, it's an exploitation framework for PowerShell. And it will use 2 types of techniques. One, I've incorporated Rasta Mouse's AMSI bypass into this, which will bypass AMSI. And if you're not familiar with what AMSI is, it's the anti-malware scan interface that is baked into Windows 10 and above. What happens is that any type of scripting language process like PowerShell and other scripting languages, what will happen is AMSI.dll will get injected into that process running memory space, and it'll create essentially an entry point to say, okay, before this actually goes and executes, submit this to a specific function type called AMSI scan string or AMSI scan buffer. And what will happen is there'll be what's called an AMSI provider. And that AMSI provider could be Windows Defender or other types of products that have integrated into the anti-malware scan interface. And why this was created is, if you obfuscate your code within PowerShell, before AMSI, it got completely around pretty much everything out there. but there's a lot of limitations on AMSI because it's still prior to it actually running versus post execution. So your obfuscation, if you just, let's just say you take, your code and then you base64 encode it. Okay, well, it's going to see that decoded base64, but it's not going to see any encryption that's in there. It's not going to see any obfuscation. It's literally going to submit it to that AMSI provider to be scanned to see whether or not it's malicious or not based on a specific signature that's been driven. So AMSI is completely broke, 10 ways to Sunday. It's extremely easy to circumvent. And again, is in that script kiddie categorization for bypassing. So if you're relying off of AMSI and AMSI providers to protect you against PowerShell or scripting-based attacks, you're in that lower categorization around what your bar of entry is for attackers. You're in that script kiddie categorization, not even a hacker or sophisticated level in your security program. So let's go ahead and run this really quick. And let me just get my IP address. And what we're going to do, gotta love live demos, by the way. So if something completely fails, it won't. I'm good at what I do, but if it does, it's fine. We're just going to create a quick interpreter shell, and I don't really care about this part. I'm just going to show the AMSI bypass component as an example here. So Unicorn will generate an AMSI bypass component to get around the anti-malware scan interface, and then the second component it's going to use is a PowerShell code that will inject into the current running PowerShell process. And it'll use create remote thread. It'll inject our interpreter shell code directly into that PowerShell process and execute using what's called a syswa64 downgrade attack that I created a number of years ago, which basically looks to see whether I'm in a 32 or 60-bit platform, and then it'll downgrade the process to a 32-bit process if I'm in a 64-bit operating system in order to keep native shell code into that environment. Again, you don't need to know all that. It's just what's happening kind of behind the scenes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the code and I'm just going to decode it really quick so I can manipulate and modify it a little bit. 2 seconds here, and I'm just going to decode it really quick. All right, so now I'm just going to decode this code really quick. Here's our decoded code right here. I'm just going to copy this, and I'll move this over to my Windows machine. Now, on my Windows 10 machine, as you can see here, I am running the latest signature version. So this is April 9th, 2021, updated 11:44. So just about an hour or so ago or two. And I do have virus and threat protection on. I did turn off the cloud delivery protection and the automatic sample submissions. Obviously, if I'm going and trying to bypass a specific detection criteria within a preventative piece of software, I don't want those submissions to go up to the cloud infrastructure for analysis. So I'm not removing any protection mechanisms per se. I'm just making sure that my submissions and samples don't get hit, down the road later on. So I have a longer breath life of using the specific type of attack. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into the PowerShell interpreter. I'm going to paste my code in here. And what you'll see here on the screen here is that this script contains malicious content and has been blocked by your antivirus software. Now, what's happening here is the PowerShell_ISC.exe process, which is located in the /Windows /System32 /Windows PowerShell /version 1.0 /PowerShell_ISC.exe. What's happening is since this is part of a scripting language, AMSI.dll is being injected into here, and then it's submitting to an AMSI provider to say, hey, is this malicious? Now, anytime I release a new version of Magic Unicorn, Microsoft will release a signature update usually within a week or so because it's such a popular tool that's out there. But other tools that I've released, for example, Trevor C2, it's been several years and there's 0 detections after that. And that's a full command and control infrastructure out there that allows full, code execution, command and control, everything else, 0 signatures for that one. So, it's just hit or miss on what they decide to home in on from a project perspective and what they do. Again, it's literally the lowest bar possible. If you write anything custom, you have 0 issues getting around this type of stuff today. So let's take a look at what's actually getting flagged here. And I obviously did a little bit of research ahead of time, but not a lot. I literally spent 5 minutes figuring out what was being caught here in this specific area. And all you need to do, by the way, if you're just playing around with this, is just start deleting specific lines. Like I can just delete this line here. And if I hit play, notice here it executes. Now it errors out, but it still executes, which means that this is post execution. So even though it executed and errored out, it means I'm getting around the signature that was released or written for the specific area. So we know that this line here is our area of detection. So since this is pre-execution, somewhere in here they wrote a signature, and we have to figure out how to break that signature in some way, shape, or form to get around it. Again, this isn't rocket science. This is actually really easy stuff to do, script kiddie level. So we go blah equals, and I'll just do amsi.dll, and I'll split this up a little bit just to be a little more fun. There. And also do blah2 equals amsi plus scan plus buffer here. So I just created 2 variable names that basically took this one and this one here. And all I'm going to do is substitute those in for the variable names that I created. And what we'll see here is we successfully bypass and get around AMSI just by making a 1-line change in our code. Again, the preventative mechanisms that are out there today are the lowest bar of security possible. So if that is what your security program is relying upon, you are at a very basic state. So you should know that. I mean, it doesn't mean that's bad. It just means that, you know, ransomware groups have a higher sophistication level. You have a high chance of ransomware occurring. You know, average hackers have a high chance of likelihood of that happening from risk perspective. Nation states, not even an issue, you know, for them. So if this is all you're relying upon for your security programs, that's a major problem for those specific risk factors. But again, if you don't have a lot of data you care about and you can recover from a ransomware attack, that's perfectly fine. But that's the bar of entry for these preventative mechanisms that we have out there for today. EDR products are fantastic visibility for organizations. The issue with EDR products is that they run into the same issue as signature-based antivirus products that we just saw from an endpoint protection product. These signatures that are developed for EDR products are the same signatures that are used for antivirus products, just a little bit less robust, or a little bit more robust, where they can create a little bit of false positives or noise, but they're written off of specific attacks they've seen in their own environments or that have been published or things to that effect, or known command and control infrastructure or those types of things. And they write signatures for those specific areas. So from an EDR perspective, you know, usually you can get around those by, again, manipulating or modifying many of the different types of attacks. Like this specific command over here circumvents a lot of EDR products because you're not calling the HCP flag within the tool itself. Now, it varies, right? You know, anytime registr32.exe is executed, that should be a trigger in your environment from a behavior detection perspective. But, you know, again, that can generate a lot of noise for a lot of these different products. So the issue that we have is that EDR products, while great visibility, and the attack may be somewhere in the data that they're ingesting, but in many cases, organizations don't have the staffing or understanding around what those attacks are to even understand that it's an actual problem. May's example, run DLL32 being imported in from a DLL perspective, causing scheduled tasks, causing registry modifications, causing encryption of the system itself. You know, those are all a chain of attacks that we would, you know, if we saw it in front of us, would be a major issue. But small to medium-sized businesses literally have no capabilities of this happening. So again, we still have a major problem here. And so the issue that we have is security is complex. Today, right now, as we sit here today, security is a complex topic. And it's often understood by organizations that have a security staff, which equals money, obviously, and an understanding of what their threat models are for their organization, the technology that they're using, and their overall risk, which incorporates likelihood, impact, and a lot of other portions to that. So our organizations, you know, right now, security is at an extremely complex rate, whereas most organizations are at a very low bar when it comes to understanding those security complexities. And complexity equals risk by far. You know, the more complexity that we have in our environment, the higher risk that we're going to have as an organization, the more technology we have. A great example is, you know, if I go to extremely small companies that have like 2 servers, my chances of breaking into them are probably slim unless I go the social engineering route, which, you know, is its own discussion. But if I go after an organization that has 1,000 servers, I have a much higher probability just by sheer ports and protocols and attack surface alone to have direct access to them. The more complexity equals more risk that we have for organizations. And we talk about the basics quite often, right? The basics are things that we do in our environment that are foundational security programs. We talk about vulnerability management. We talk about network segmentation, patch management. We talk about governance, risk, and compliance. We talk about monitoring and detection. These are basic programs, but basic doesn't mean easy. Basics are extremely difficult to implement in most organizations because I still have yet to see a phenomenal vulnerability management program. Might be good on the operating system, laptop side, maybe some of the third parties. When you start getting into the middleware tier, like applications and things to that effect, the ownership of those things start to go out the window and things get much different. But when you start getting into more and more complexity, it equates to multiple risks. And that's because of legacy, whether that's on-premise or cloud infrastructure, whether that's your laptops or workstations. Again, complexity equals risk. And until we simplify our infrastructure and architecture models, and until we remove legacy, and until we focus on reducing complexity in our environment, we will continue to see high level of risk, which equates to a high level of breaches that we saw earlier on in 2020 from that specific data set. And there's really no need today. I mean, what happened with COVID was obviously extremely unfortunate. It still continues to be. But what happened was it demonstrated that businesses can function remotely, that we don't need to be a full stack network network infrastructure for organizations, that we can provide services for organizations to operate by. We don't need full access VPNs anymore. We don't need, the ability for one user to be the downfall of an entire organization. Dave Attell, who ran, Immunity and Cabinets for a while, and he made a tweet recently about one of the hardest companies that was hard for him to hack into. And it was a company that had a completely decentralized technology model. And they were kind of all over the place. And it was extremely difficult for him to get into because, lateral movement and other things around consistency and using one system as the next completely went out the window. Now, I'm not saying that's the right approach. That's, kind of asking for it. But when you reduce what your users have access to, you reduce your attack surface, it's just a recipe for success. You have less chances of an attacker taking that one system and being able to abuse that into other systems as you go along. It's not a foolproof way of designing your infrastructure, but it's definitely better than what we have today. And, I really feel like this is kind of information security today, where we have an easy path, which again isn't easy, but it's forward thinking. And that's the difference between hard and easy today, is that we're focusing very much on what's in front of us right now. We're not focusing on what's strategy and for us to look at longer down the road. Network architecture and redesign is down the road, which makes things easier for us. Becoming more of a services-based organization and not allowing full ports and protocols and domain controllers and things to that effect across the board is forward thinking and will be eventually easy. I'm not saying it's easy to do now. Obviously, network re-architecture and design takes a lot of work and effort. But as we move towards that, our technology debt and our legacy systems become much easier to manage and maintain as those types of things happen. And it's almost impossible today to navigate the complexities that businesses face with cybersecurity. I mean, unless you have a fully dedicated cybersecurity team or a managed service provider or, an MSSP, you literally have no way to compete today in technology and security. Proxy Login is a great example of that. Where you literally had an unprecedented attack, happen from a sophisticated adversary, right? Where they used it for espionage at first, low and slow, but then eventually it went towards, just mass exploitation of hundreds of thousands of systems that people needed to patch literally immediately. And what we saw is that even though the news was all over this and we were, the security industry, the communities were all like patch, by the following week, when all this mass exploitation was still occurring, we still had tens of thousands of systems that had not been patched. It's a complete unfair advantage for these organizations that have these systems that have no idea how to run them. And that's really the world that we live in today, is that, we have a number of organizations that have the ability to have security, and we have organizations that don't have the ability to have security. And even basic concepts that I talked about before, basic doesn't equal security. But small to medium-sized businesses are literally at the highest risk because they don't have the ability to have an understanding around what security is and doing their business in technology. They assume that if they're using a cloud provider, they're protected. They assume that their on-premise Exchange infrastructure is protected. They assume that they have a firewall, they're good. They assume they have antivirus, and as we saw, is the lowest bar possible, are good. How many companies do you know out there from a small to medium-sized business perspective, have more than the lowest bar possible that we see today? And that's an issue that we have, is that we've created complexity in all these organizations where the lowest bar possible isn't good enough to withstand the types of attacks that we see today. And truth of the matter is, there is no castle mentality from cybersecurity. There never was. We have work from home users, we have our cloud infrastructure, we have all of these different systems that are out there. We're a major city now, where we have people coming in and out all day long that we don't know who they are. They're coming from other states and they're coming from other locations. We don't have a castle to fortify anymore. We have to be able to identify what these types of attacks are happening in our environment and to be able to respond to remove them from our cities or from our perimeters or our internal networks as we go along. And if you look at a lot of things that are happening now with crowdsource versus a lot of the products today are based off of what they've seen in other organizations. So it's a whack-a-mole approach. Let's hope that our organization isn't attacked first by this specific type of attack or this variant, and then we'll promote that out to the rest of the organizations to share that information. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's a very good thing. You want to be able to have that type of data of actual attacks that are happening in your environment to be able to share that information out. And that's one awesome thing about this industry, is that we're so open with our information. We're so open with sharing. We're so open with collaborating to help. But the problem is that, again, your organization is completely different than the next. And so one detection for you may work, but any modification or change to that is going to impact your organization. A better approach is understanding, listen, what's our baseline of traffic within our organization, which is not easy to do, by the way. And let's look for deviations of those baselines. A good example is, why hasn't the MITRE attack framework been adopted by every organization that's out there? Well, because it requires skill, it requires money, it requires people investments, and it requires investment in visibility in your organization. You're not going to get it from an EDR product. You're not going to get it from your base SIM. You're not going to get it from pulling Windows event logs. You actually have to do some groundwork and look at what you actually have from a technological footprint perspective and how well those systems do, mapping all of those different things to understand, hey, these are the things that we need to do to get better visibility into our environment. And so all these things create these complexities, again, that we have. But the crowdsource model versus is very different. Let's take a look, just a few slides ago, on that Reg SVR 32 detection. A good detection here would have been, anytime Reg SVR 32 is ever executed in our environment, I want to take a look at that. And we may have false positives. Okay, that's fine. Put exceptions in place for those false positives, but make that detection your organization. So anytime that process is ever executed, you get a notification for that in your environment. And those are things that you can do to start to craft and home in on these types of attacks that may change or be crafted differently over time. So again, ways that we can get better with detections versus what we see today in crowdsourced environments. And there's a big difference between sophisticated and non-sophisticated. When we talk about sophisticated, what's interesting is that if you look at kind of the evolution of ransomware, I made this mistake. 10 years ago, I'm like, it's just a fad. These folks are going after like the low hanging fruit. They're going after, grandma and grandpa. They're going after churches. They're going after people that don't literally have any understanding of technology whatsoever. And the big mistake that I made thinking about this was that, they made a lot of money initially off of these less sophisticated victims. And instead of just taking all the money and running, like I thought they would do, it became very much an organized business for these organizations. And they took that money and invested it in research and development, in tooling and capabilities, in building out their attack chains and how they're going to go after organizations, maximizing impact by going after backups and making sure that organizations couldn't recover. And instead of this small, tiny operation, now we have a major problem where sophistication is now in the hands of ransomware groups, very similar to what we see from a nation state perspective. And so, now we have these low-end hackers that, would still easily get around the script kidding models of our protection mechanisms in our antivirus products and our endpoint protection products. But now they're at a level now where even our EDR products can't even compete with them. And so now we have all these major issues from a sophistication perspective, that we have these groups that can literally cripple organizations, shut us down, and then require tens of millions of dollars of return in order for us to get that back, with the promise that they won't do it again for another year or so. So that's a major problem, is sophistication continues to be an issue. And we're not even talking supply chain. Like, these supply chain attacks, boom, mind blown, right? It completely destroys our level of trust that we have in these organizations and companies, because, you look at SolarWinds as an example, not Petya as another example. We've seen supply chain attacks historically in the past, where these types of attacks literally completely destroy our models of security as organizations. But they really shouldn't. Let's take a quick step on the SolarWinds. I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing about it, because I know I was exhausted those couple of weeks that was going on. Same thing for Proxy Login. I'm tired of hearing about them. But there's some lessons that we can learn from those types of attacks. When you look at SolarWinds as an example, where SolarWinds, the Orion software itself was compromised, and then the update mechanisms were used in order to push out malicious updates to a number of organizations, especially large size organizations. What I found very interesting about that was, in order for the C2 to actually work, the command and control infrastructure to work in those, what had to happen is the update mechanism from SolarWinds would push down that update to the SolarWinds server. The SolarWinds server then use that update, that malicious code would then execute. And then what would happen is that server that in that environment, in that organization's environment, would then beacon out to the internet directly and register a unique command and control infrastructure for that individual company, right? So the server had to communicate out directly. And you look at these big corporations, obviously Microsoft was part of that, Intel, VMware, Cisco. None of these organizations practiced egress filtering in any capacity, because obviously those servers were allowed to go out to dynamic DNS hosts and establish command and control infrastructure from their server environments. Like, what? Like, how is that even a thing? Like, how are we still allowing servers, our most protected intellectual property, keys to the kingdom, run our entire organization, communicate, unrestrictedly to the internet itself? That to me is like 1990s based security. And the fact that we're not doing that across every single organization is literally why we're sitting here today talking about this subject. These things are not rocket science. What I'm talking about today is not revolutionary in any way, shape, or form. It's stuff that we've been talking about since security started. Why do servers ever need to communicate out to the internet? Why don't we manage them through our third-party package management repositories? Or even if they do have to communicate out to the internet, allowing them only to the sites that they absolutely need access to in order to adopt it. And honestly, if you have a vendor that can't provide that for you, they should not be a vendor within your organization. You should not have a vendor that cannot provide what servers it needs for update mechanisms in your organization. You should never, ever, ever allow any server any access directly to the internet, period. Would have stopped SolarWinds right in its tracks. Yes, you would have had the malicious code in your environment, but it would have done nothing. It literally would have sat there and done nothing trying to beacon out to the internet because you're shutting it down. No command and control, no post-exploitation, literally stopped it dead in its water. Architecture has a big deal to do with a lot of the stuff that we see today. Why do we need to design a SolarWinds infrastructure in our environment that has access to everything? Why not build models or threat models or understanding supply chain attacks and saying, we're going to minimize as many ports and protocols and services for this new solution that we're bringing into our organization, whether it's software that we need for our HR system or whatever it ends up being. We're going to shrink this down as much as possible so that if it's an on-premise solution, it barely has access to anything in our organization, so that in the event we see a compromise, it's lighting up like a Christmas tree in our organization because things are happening. You start going to the non-sophisticated side, we still see breaches happen, obviously, on this specific side as well. And a lot of these, again, things like multi-factor authentication, business email compromise is a prime example of that. Our architecture designs that I mentioned, patch management, having a CVE that's 6 months or older that has remote code execution on it, that's your own fault. And I'm not saying it's easy. Again, I'm not saying that that's an easy thing, but we should be reducing those in our environment or focusing on those. Reducing attack surface by minimizing ports and protocols, not allowing access to certain systems, moving the cloud infrastructure, in certain cases, especially if it's non-sensitive data to your organization or intellectual property. I'm a huge advocate of application control or application whitelisting. I think that's one of the most effective ways of shutting down a lot of these attacks that we see today from a remote code execution perspective. But yet it's hard work because we don't have any standardization of configuration management within our organization. So how do you implement that when every single laptop is completely different? Servers are an easy one, and why more companies don't do application control on server level still is mind-boggling to me in many cases. But again, application control, probably the most effective solution for stopping code execution onto the system that I've ever seen before, still in my time, 20 years in the security industry. Companies that have done it well, it is a nightmare to break into those types of organizations. So the crux of this is we have to make things easier. And what I mean by that is software and hardware vendors, you're on notice. You have to design security by default. There is no more of these, hey, your password for your router is going to be, printed on the bottom of this device, and it's going to be the same one that everybody else gets. You allow users to sign up without multi-factor authentication. It just can't happen anymore. We have to move beyond the basic levels that we know are going to be flawed and compromised. Banks that don't automatically enroll you in two-factor authentication, that's a major issue. I'd move to a different bank. We have to start holding these organizations accountable for the things that they're doing because if they're not baselining security, it means that every single person is at risk from, a password being compromised in one location, somebody using else in the other. I mean, everybody does that. Not me, but everybody else does that. So we have to be able to hold these companies accountable for building this type of stuff in by default, and not as something as a premium pay solution that we look for in the past. And yes, I'm talking about Microsoft in this specific case. This one drives me nuts about Microsoft 365. Microsoft's made a lot of progress on the security fronts. And again, kudos. There's a lot of phenomenal people there. One of the things that drives me absolutely insane by Microsoft Office 365 is that, they implemented something recently called security defaults, which is a good start. But it's not multi-factor authentication. It's essentially you enroll somebody into multi-factor authentication, and if they find any unusual activity in your account, then they require you to kind of validate that system from a multi-factor authentication perspective. A good example of this, I recently registered a multi-factor recently registered an Office 365 tenant. And then I obviously security defaults is on by default. When I registered that user, I logged in from my workstation, I logged in from my mobile phone, and I logged in from another system, and not once did it prompt me for two-factor authentication. That's a problem. And that's by default, right? Now, guess what you have to do in order to enable multi-factor authentication by default for all users? One, you have to pay a premium. You have to pay for the Azure services on P1. So you're paying additional money to get multi-factor authentication by default for your users. You have to turn off security defaults, which then creates this big warning message. Are you sure you want to turn off security defaults? Because it has a lot of security features in it. And then you have to use a conditional access policy to create that every time you create a new user account, it enforces multi-factor authentication. That's a travesty. That is an absolute travesty when it comes to trying to protect users and making it simple. Every single person, you should make it extremely difficult. As difficult as you make it for multi-factor authentication to be enabled on a user account should be the exact opposite. And when you're trying to remove multi-factor authentication from a default user account, by default, Microsoft 365 and any other type of solution, Gmail, whatever it ends up being, should have that on by default and make it hard as hell to remove those types of functions as things go along. It's ridiculous that we don't have that today, and it's becoming a major problem. I mean, someday, hopefully in my lifetime, we move off of passwords, period. Passwords are obviously the crux of all of this. Our human behavior patterns of how we do things. Obviously, things like UB keys and other ways can solve a lot of those different issues, but adoption of that becomes very difficult. I really hope application control continues to prominate within a lot of organizations. And allow listing, for specific systems. Those are all things that make a big difference in your security. Minimization of full VPNs, reducing the amount of access that individuals have within your organization and web-based services, providing those services for your company. Only allowing servers to communicate to approved outbound communications. I mean, like basic stuff here, folks. This isn't rocket science. Backup strategies that look at, hey, we probably shouldn't have our entire network that can have access to our backup solutions. Let's only have, jump boxes with multi-factor authentication, and we don't allow access to the internet in any capacity. We literally protect those systems like they are the keys to our kingdom, because they are. Those are things that we can do to really make things easier and more protective within our organization. And again, this all goes back to technology complexity. Another great example is Azure Sentinel. I'm a big fan of Azure Sentinel. It took a little while to get there. My team over at Binary Defense showed me the ways. It's very powerful. Azure Sentinel is an extremely powerful platform for any organization, right? The main issue with Azure Sentinel, though, is it requires a massive team with a great deal of understanding to even come close to having value of that within your organization. You have to have a solid understanding of KQL. You have to have a solid understanding of how Azure Sentinel works and the communications and how to get connectors into place and to get the data. Azure Sentinel plus Sysmon is an amazing pairing. But, not writing detections and not understanding how to build that out in your infrastructure over time is the problem that we have. Again, it's complexity. There's nothing out of the box that I would say Azure Sentinel does that any other application couldn't do or does well. I don't see a lot of value just taking Azure Sentinel, putting a couple of your connectors from Office 365 in and saying you have a SIM. It doesn't work that way. You need a team dedicated to understanding how this thing works. And it is extremely complex. It is not an easy thing to go through. And, some quirks with the interfaces and things like that. But overall, you can make it a pretty amazing solution. And this isn't just picking on Sentinel. This is any product that you have, whether it's a SIM or an EDR product. It requires staffing and people that understand what they're doing to actually go and do this. Again, the bar is set so high from a complexity perspective. when the sophistication level of most organizations are at this level. It's not, there's this massive mountain to get over for these companies. So regardless of size, if you're doing technology as part of your business, you need a budget for security. Like that's there's no if, and, or buts anymore. This isn't a discussion or debate. You have to do security if you are using technology in your organization and business. And so whether that, and what that is, you determine it, obviously understanding your threat models in your organization, the type of intellectual property you have and what you can and can't lose, and your overall risk, that should determine what you focus on from a security budget perspective in your organization. But unfortunately, there isn't a solution or package that's going to help you in today's technological world. It is complex. It requires people that understand those complexities to build that complexity to reduce your risk in your environment. And it really comes down to, we have to have visibility in our organizations, right? It starts with understanding the assets that you own. And I hate, this is a bad word in a lot of organizations, CMDB, but understanding the technology you own, being able to protect that technology, being able to design something that withstands a long period of time. And then from there, having visibility into your organization on what's normal, what's not, is where we're at today from a security perspective. And some of the basics that works, this is just a great laundry list. I'm not going to go through every single one. I'm a huge fan, again, of application control, but even just doing WDAC, using Windows Defender application control to stop regular executables from running in user profile directories. Those are all things that we can do to really, make a big difference when it comes to stopping a lot of these commodity threats that we see out there. But application control is huge. Never allow administration to occur to regular systems in normal use. Why do we still need macros today? Disallowing PowerShell from regular users. Does Bob in sales need a full-fledged programming language at his fingertips? Consider device and credential graph for protecting credentials, leveraging the latest versions of PowerShell, hardening and testing your Active Directory environment. Again, enabling Windows Firewall so you can't use, communications from system to system to system for lateral movement. Detective endpoint logs, DNS logs from north to south, east to west. Visibility in cloud. Does anybody have visibility in cloud today? Do you have equal or greater visibility into your cloud infrastructure as you do to your on-premise? Usually the answer to that is going to be no. Get more visibility into there. Huge fan of Sysmon. Huge fan of Olaf's Sysmon Modular. Fantastic resource to get started with Sysmon. You can also check out the Trusted Sec Sysmon community guide, which walks through how to leverage Sysmon in every retrospect. But a lot of good stuff here that makes a big impact and difference in your organization that makes it a lot harder to go and do. And obviously, multi-factor authentication as a key component of that. So how do we plan for tomorrow? These are my last two slides before I run out of time here. But really, the challenge that we have today is that we're going to continuously see 0 days. I mean, did you see the latest Pwn to Own? My gosh, that was some mind-blowing awesomeness. I love Pwn to Own. I love seeing the results of that. I mean, those folks are just so brilliant. If you've ever watched or looked at or ever been an exploit researcher, all of my exploits that I've written in the past, it's such a time suck, but it's such a precision attack of just perfection. To do all those things, to trigger a bug or multiple bugs, to get your code execution eventually to happen, to fully compromise all of the protection mechanisms that are built in to stop you. And then from there, you get it. And that is such an amazing feat. But we know that 0 days are going to continue to be prominent. They're going to be prominent in highest bid type organizations, i.e., ransomware groups are to some extent a little bit less, but obviously more on the nation state side of the house. Supply chain attacks I really see as being the next evolution for ransomware. I mean, why would ransomware continue to keep targeting individual companies? I mean, they will for an extent, but why not go after 1,000 companies at the exact same time or 10,000 companies at the exact same time to maximize your amount of return? So we will see ransomware evolve to supply chain. There's already chatter on it now. There's already capabilities being evaluated. Again, those are things that are going to happen. Really, the fix for this is understanding the threat models towards our organization. Who are our adversaries that will want to have access to us? What's the likelihood of that occurring? And how do we look at their capabilities and build defenses, both preventative and detective, preventative being the basics, network architecture, patch management, the foundational pieces that we have from a technology perspective, to the monitoring and detection side of, if we see a breach happen, can we respond much more effectively to it? Those are things that we need to focus on. Focusing on user isolation. Users shouldn't have access to other users. Users shouldn't have access to other servers and infrastructure. Minimizing it to only what they need access to in their environment, and really focusing on those key components around those. And monitor detection, again, all these things together will span the ages as we see things go along. And last but not least, this industry is made up of some awesome professionals, that are all working together collaboratively, sometimes not collaboratively. There's obviously a lot of debates happening out there on offensive security tooling, when we should release proof of concepts. At the end of the day, there is obviously a varying different level of what's best and what's good, or what's right or what's wrong for this industry. But at the end of the day, red and blue working together is really the key to all the success. We have to understand how offense works, how these adversaries are attacking, and blue, blue getting barraged all the time with all this different types of data and trying to formulate in a way that allows us to protect our infrastructure. Everybody's working together in a way collaborative that I've never seen before in my 20 years of experience. And that is an amazing thing to see. We have accomplished so much in such a short period of time. This industry is so young that it's really incredible to see everybody working together for the benefit of their own. But I really want to thank Unicon for having me here today. I really appreciate everybody's time. And, again, hopefully the rest of the conference goes awesome. And look forward to seeing everybody again, hopefully soon, and hopefully in person, which would be amazing and awesome.
Yes, it would. Thank you so much, Dave. Awesome keynote. One thing about keynotes is you're paving the path for the next talks. And, you talked a little bit about threat hunting and Sysmon, and our next talk is Randy and Justin from Binary Defense covering just that. And interestingly enough, they are going to, they ran the Maze threat and adversary emulation plan we created. And then later on, you covered some stuff about EDR. We have Jean Mais from Inviso, which I failed to mention earlier on. So I apologize, John. We'll be doing some pretty cool stuff there. And you also mentioned small businesses and what can they do for best bang for your buck security. So we have Urban Johnson on that. So I don't know if you planned that. I think you did, or it just happened, but amazing. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you. And Randy and Justin, good seeing you guys. And I'm going to drive to Justin's house right now and egg his house. So just an FYI. While he's on the talk.